at the start of our data, Netflix was way ahead on that browsing experience. Their suggestion engine is really good. Like the customers are much more likely to say, hey, I found something that I wanted to watch when I was browsing compared to all of the other competitors. That gap is actually narrowed.
Good morning, Jason. Good to
Morning.
see you. How are you?
Good to see you too.
For everybody out there watching, thanks for tuning in. I'm Scott Kronitsky. I'm the head of US streaming here at NPS Prism, and really excited to talk to Jason Bauer today. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Jason Barrow, partner at Bain, founder of NPS Prism. Excited to talk on streaming, one of my favorite markets we have coverage for in Prism.
Jason, we've got a lot to talk about today. The so-called streaming wars have taken a very interesting turn in 2023,
Yes.
to say the least. There's HBO Max is now just Max. It's very interesting to see what's happening in brand loyalty. Netflix is cracking down on password sharing. There's a writer strike, ad-supported tiers, a lot going on. Where should we start? One thing that I would love to get your take on is this idea about quality versus quantity of content. I feel like at the beginning, there's so many services coming out. There's just a glut of content, and now everybody's starting to cut back a little bit. How do streaming services find this balance? How does that impact loyalty?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, across any of our instruments, I always describe it as, we don't just have the scores, we can really break apart the why. So if Netflix is ahead of Peacock, why are they ahead? And in streaming, the why breaks down really into three categories of things. There's stuff which is about, I would sort of say, the product. As you said, it's about the quantity and quality of the shows that are available to watch. The second element is about price. Basically, do customers feel like they're getting good value? And then there is the user experience, sort of the episodes, the journeys, like the actual using the tool, using the service. And so in streaming, really all three of those things matter. Netflix obviously has been up at the top of our rankings the whole time we've been up and running. I would say it's gotten a bit tighter over time, but they'd always been winning on sort of quantity of what to watch. Sort of, I'd always described it as,
Absolutely,
the largest library, but maybe like B+ quality. And then there are obviously some of the other players which are trying for perhaps a smaller quantity, but a higher quality. Think about like what Apple's doing, what Disney's doing. And again, the sort of the tool enables to play off sort of how those trade-offs are working for customers. And it's, part of it is the customers can also get the quantity by having more than one subscription service, obviously, which is also another big dynamic that's playing.
So let's talk about the second item you touched on, which is cost. This is changing pretty dramatically. For example, when YouTube TV came out in 2017, it was $35. It's double that right now, right? So they gained a lot of people, but the price point is starting to inch up closer and closer to your traditional cable TV providers. Netflix, Max, everybody's starting to raise their price. Do you think consumers are going to care?
I always started, when I first started looking at data for this market, it was from the standpoint of the cable companies, the old line cable companies where you used to get your video services, which is obviously less and less true these days. But if you took a step back and said, why did people not like their cable companies for that service? It was basically, the things that were causing customers to get angry were twofold. That they were having fights about money. I sort of describe them as fights. It's like the price changed and you didn't know why, or you were getting fees and you didn't know why. It's like we've all had these types of experiences. And then obviously you have the break fixes. It's like it just stops working and the process is painful. If you take a step, what the streaming services really were winning on at the beginning was that their customers had very few to any break fix experiences and almost no fights about money, like sort of just universally. And some of it's about the level of the price, but it's also about the fact that they weren't really changing. So there's none of this prices going up and down, lots of promotional pricing. But one of the things that obviously is starting to happen is that the pricing construct in streaming looks like it's about to change a bit.
It seems like it wasn't sustainable.
Sharing crackdowns are part of that. Right. Yeah, no, at the end of the day, maybe that didn't work for creating the profitability that's required. But the risk for these companies is that you go back a bit to what the cable TV guys were doing. Like maybe you're not going to have the same break fix problems, But if you have the same types of fights about money experiences, that's obviously going to pull down customer happiness and satisfaction across the board. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not the streaming companies end up going back to what the cable companies have been doing from a pricing perspective.
And it will be interested to see how that affects their and it will be interesting to see how that affects their net promoter score over time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, I think, the password sharing restriction is basically a price increase. That's essentially what it is. It is for me. I know I've gone and I've signed up for a service that I had been borrowing with family all along, and now we have our own subscription in the house. And so, that's how it's going to show up, but it's going to impact happiness with those services. It's going to impact how many total services you subscribe to. We had also been at this period of time where it seemed like there was always room to add one more. And I assume that we're hitting close to that cap and being able to track whether or not people are going to retrench a bit on how many of these things that they watch in their streaming.
One of the things that we've seen at NPS Prism across industry is the importance of communication ahead of time with customers. It seems like something that would be second nature across industries, but it's not, which is when there's a price increase. Yes, that is frustrating, right, but it is more frustrating if it becomes a surprise. Nobody likes it when you look at your credit card bill and you say, that doubled? I never heard about this. I feel like that's where the fights start, and you see that in the data where you don't hear about that ahead of time. What is there to be learned from other industries and streaming about communicating ahead of time? Because you could see some people that said, okay, Netflix, I knew the password sharing crackdown happened, didn't know it was going to be today, right when you're about to turn on your favorite show. Not that there's ever a good time, but there's better times than others, right?
We see it with the cable companies. Like, we still talk with the cable companies about their pricing behaviors, because obviously it comes up both with internet as well as their video services. But we see big lift for a price change experience, whether the customer knew it was coming versus they found out on their own by checking out the bill and being surprised by it. And that swings NPS by 30, 40 points in the my price changed experience. So absolutely, we see this across all sorts of industries. On if you're going to be doing something that is not so nice with your customers, clearly communicating it and having the customers understand why is really quite important. One of the conversations I've had with my telco clients over the years is that they ended up in this really weird pricing construct where their worst customers had their best pricing. It's like completely backwards. And if you would never build an industry from scratch that way. But that's where you end up when you end up in this doom loop of promotional pricing and promo roll-offs and teaching your customers to, negotiate with you on when to get. And you see some of this in insurance, you see it in cable, but streaming hadn't had that. But that's a bad place to end up if the pricing constructs go back that direction.
I think something I'm really excited to see the data on, we'll have this on these new ad-supported tiers, is how that also affects satisfaction, right? We all know what it's like to watch a TV show where you feel like you're watching more, even if it's just perception, more commercials than actual show. That's never been a problem in streaming, where you can fast forward, rewind, pause it whenever you want to. Yeah. And I'm very interested to see how they're going to find that balance. Again, something the cable companies have had to figure out, and they're having to deal with what's the right length of ad, how do we monetize this? How do we sell the ads? What do those tiers look like?
Yeah. And again, I think almost all the players are going to be experimenting ad versus ad free services. It looks like that the market's moving that way a little bit. And again, I think we will be able to pick up whether customers are happy with it. And it shows up both in the value for service element, holding fixed how much you're paying. If you suddenly have to make the experience of watching worse, that's obviously less good. And so, the companies that were giving away ad-free stuff at a really low price were obviously winning on value. Adding of the ads and making them pay higher amounts of money is obviously going to impact who's ahead on the value piece.
Jason, it seems like last year there's a new streaming service that was coming out pretty much every week. I was having trouble keeping track of it all. one of the interesting things we have data on in Prism, and we can cut this by age group demographic, is how many services people have. Are they having services that are what we call dormant, right? They subscribe to them and they pay for them, but they haven't seen them in a long time. Have we reached the
Right.
saturation point of new services coming out? Could there be a consolidation based on what we've seen? When is the third, fourth, fifth subscription
Yeah.
enough?
Yeah, no, my guess is that we're actually getting close to the saturation rate on this. This is obviously one of the things that we're going to track. But I would think, particularly with the password sharing stuff, the crackdown, we see in our data that, there are a lot of consumers who are at least watching 4, 5, 6 plus streaming services with some regularity. I would expect that number to come down if they end up having to be services that each individual household is paying for. And so it'll be really interesting to see who wins once these things become real trade-offs. And, if I'm going to watch A, it means I'm really not watching. And so I that is one of the really interesting things that we're going to look to track. I think, that with the password sharing, I think two big things that we'll be tracking over the next 3 to 6 months. Sort of one is, are the price things causing consumers to be less happy with their streaming services? Basically, are they having more price change experiences, more fights about the money with their streaming services in a way where it's starting to pull down their overall satisfaction? And then how is it actually changing their consumer behavior? Are they having fewer things? Are they switching away from the ones that have more price increases versus the ones that have less price increases? It's a source of differentiation that really hasn't been there in this market to a great degree before. And so in all the markets where that type of thing plays a lot, it matters a lot. So it'll be really interesting to see where this all shakes out over the coming quarters.
And I think all of the services are going to be watching, right? If they see that the password sharing didn't have an adverse of an effect on the net promoter scores they thought they would. Of course, if you're, Max, you might think, okay, maybe we need to crack down the password sharing and actually help Netflix gain, NetSoup subscribers, where, the opposite, if we see that in the data, which is actually people are getting angrier. We're actually not getting more subscribers. We're seeing a lot more churn.
Right.
Then I think it's going to be a lot more likely that the other leading providers are going to be very, very wary of following suit.
Oh yeah, and it's a price quality trade off. So not all of the providers are equally positioned to be able to make this play.
That's
There's
right.
some of the providers, either the quantity or the quality of the stuff is high enough that there's more willingness to pay, and so it really won't impact the business negatively if they're raising prices. There are definitely some players in the market where they are not in a strong enough position product wise where they can start playing this pricing game and really win it. Like if you push the consumers who are already on the margin from a product quality standpoint and then ask them to suddenly pay more money, that's going to send a lot of customers away.
Yeah, and it gets back a little bit to that quality and content debate, or another way of putting it is what I'd call discovery versus your like big headliner shows. And one thing I think we've seen Netflix be really good at is discovery, right?
Yes.
They are the one platform I go to where I actually don't know what I want to watch, and I will go on there and I'll, because there's so much there, and I would say generally a pretty good user experience in terms of recommending what I want, where I go to Max when I know, Game of Thrones or whatever, it's the major show that's happening. And it's interesting to see that balance depending on the platform of, the big name show, but I might not stick around, versus Netflix, which is great at, I don't know what I want to watch, I'm going to hang out on here and see what comes to me.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about our journey and episode lens in this market, but when you break apart the pieces of the experience, the two that really spike in this market are search and browse. And the idea is browse is, I don't know what I want to watch, but I want to be able to find something. And search is, I know what I'm looking for. How easy is it to get to the thing that I'm looking for? So I'm searching for something specific. And those are sources of real differentiation for the players. I would say, at the start of our data, Netflix was way ahead on that browsing experience. Basically, it shows up as their suggestion engine is really good. Like the customers are much more likely to say, hey, I found something that I wanted to watch when I was browsing compared to all of the other competitors. That gap is actually narrowed. Like Netflix
Other players
is,
have caught up. Yeah.
other players have caught up. I think, Hulu is the one that sort of has closed that gap from a browsing experience. And so we do see that source of differentiation narrowing. But those are, the interesting thing is before there was stuff going on with pricing, the journeys that mattered were all about use. It was who was good at search, who was good at browse. Am I likely to find something I want to watch? If I find it, am I likely to watch it for a long period of time? All of those things that Netflix was super good at relative to the competition. And now it's obviously you're going to have those types of experiences plus now the price one. And the question is how that all nets out. Obviously, the product quality stuff overlays with that search and browse experiences. Like that depends a bit. Some of it is about the functionality. Like, is it easy to navigate the app effectively? And some of it is obviously about, are they actually sitting on a large and quality library of things to watch?
And speaking of that library, this could become more important than ever with the writer's strike going on, depending on how long this lasts. I know in the last writer's strike, that was kind of a new renaissance of reality TV, right? Because
Yeah, exactly.
scripted TV wasn't happening, and it's going to be really interesting to see if sitting on a large library of content, having a great product, a good search experience, a good browse experience might have a bigger impact, being that these new big name shows, depending on how long this goes, may not be coming out with the same regularity that viewers are used to.
Yeah, and again, I think that this will impact certain providers more than others, but the ones who are really reliant on their release calendar of new content, eventually they're going to hit the end of what's ready and sort of in post production, as opposed to things that they are having to actually create now. And so yeah, eventually that will matter, and it's going to force the providers to be more reliant on older content or on things that you can produce without a writing staff.
Well, Jason, I'm really excited to sit down with you in a few weeks once we see the data come in
Yes,
NPS Prism, the effect of all these things. I
that's
think we
right.
might have to have another conversation.
We will.
Then it won't be our predictions. We have the data to
That's
tell
right.
us exactly
Let's
what's happened.
let's see. We certainly have predictions about what the data is likely to look like now over the coming months. So yeah, excited to continue the conversation. And yeah, it's always fun to see if the data looks like how we think it's going to look. So we will definitely catch up and talk about it.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure speaking with you. You always have a unique perspective on the customer experience, no matter what the industry is, and streaming is certainly a fun one.
Absolutely. So fun to catch up, Scott.
Take care.
Forward to doing this again soon.
Bye.